Bernie Sanders is not holding back on his criticism of the Democrats, and I wonder if his criticism mirrors that of Donald Trump's as well. Hi, everyone. My name is Christopher. I'm the host of the Open Minds Show here on YouTube, but I'm trying to inject a level of moderation back into our political discourse. So if you haven't already, hit that like button, subscribe, tell all your friends. That would be great. So Bernie Sanders did not hold back in his criticism of the Democratic Party. Here's what he had to say.
Pastor's campaign saying, quote, "It should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them." And independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont joins me now. Senator Sanders, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here on this Sunday after Election Day. Let's start right there. Your criticism incredibly direct. You say you think the Democratic Party has, quote, abandoned the working class. How exactly do you think Democrats have abandoned the working class, Senator?
Look, the working people of this country are extremely angry. They have a right to be angry. In the richest country in the history of the world, today, the people on top are doing phenomenally well, while 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, and millions of families worry that their kids are actually going to have a lower standard of living than they do. You got the top 1% owning more wealth than the bottom 90%. We're the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all of our people. 25% of our seniors are trying to live on $15,000 a year or less. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. And the gap between the people on top and everybody else is getting wider and wider.
You know what's interesting? I actually think that Donald Trump would agree with Bernie Sanders on many of those points. It's just the prescription is that both are coming at it from completely different angles. Donald Trump would probably say, listen, we need better paying jobs in the United States that would alleviate some of these issues. Whereas Bernie Sanders and others, perhaps on the left, would argue that it's not enough. We actually need more government programs and other social supports to help people. Now, from the Republican or conservative standpoint, they would look at that as expanding the bureaucracy and it would lead to inefficiencies, etc. Also, it would increase more taxation, more spending. Not sure if that would help or hurt people in those dire situations. But what would be a better prescription for Republicans or conservatives are well-paying jobs. And I think this is perhaps why Democrats didn't want Bernie Sanders to debate Donald Trump in 2016, because what you would find is overall an agreement on the premise of these topics, but again, the prescription being vastly different. And then it would get into the merits of each other's prescriptions. And perhaps what the Democrats would find is that they actually have moved away from some of the talking points that Donald Trump is now taking over. So Donald Trump says we need to bring jobs back to the United States. Well, that was a main concern for Democrats and left-leaning politicians in the 90s. When the North American Free Trade Agreement was signed, many Democrats fought tooth and nail to get well-paying jobs to be stayed in the United States. And Donald Trump has taken over that entire policy idea. As well, when it comes to foreign interference and other things like that, Donald Trump is very much against, very much for tariffs on China and other countries around the world. And what's also interesting here is that Donald Trump has taken over these policies that market themselves towards the working class. And so it seems to me, and this is true in 2016 as well, is that the Democrats have moved away from the working class and towards, more corporate or elitists that have very strong social policies, whereas Donald Trump has shifted towards the working class and has rallied a lot of support as a result of that. And I think the reason why Bernie Sanders doesn't debate Donald Trump is because there's that convergence of both viewpoints. But again, the prescription is vastly different. But let's go on to hear what Bernie has to say about the Democratic Party.
results. You've heard some of the reaction throughout the Democratic Party. How much do you personally blame President Biden for this loss?
President Biden, when he came into office, said that he would be the most progressive president since FDR. And I think on domestic issues, not foreign policy, on domestic issues, he has kept his word, and the agenda that he has pushed through has been an extraordinarily strong one. But that agenda has got to be placed within the overall context of American society today. And that American society today is one in which tens of millions of working families and elderly people are struggling, while the people on top have never had it so good.
But Senator, should he have gotten out of the race more quickly, as some are arguing?
I supported him because I think his agenda was a strong agenda, a working class agenda. I'm not going to look backwards. Kamala ran a strong campaign. She did everything that she could. She decisively won the debate. So to me, it's not just about the campaign. It's about what does the Democratic Party stand for? Do ordinary people say, yeah, that is a party that is fighting for my interest and prepared to take on the big money interest who control the economic and political life of the country?
We're talking.
So that was a bit of an odd statement there that I found from Bernie Sanders. And on the one hand, he's complimenting Joe Biden on domestic issues. He's complimenting Kamala Harris, but then he's also criticizing the party itself in some way. And you think that he would also criticize Joe Biden, perhaps for not shifting the party as he could have, or Kamala for shifting the party as she could have, given the fact that they were in positions of power within the party. So it's interesting there, and maybe it's a play on politics, and maybe I'm reading a bit too much into it, but my sense is that Bernie Sanders is playing a little bit of politics there by not ruffling the feathers of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But I also think that he's also talking about the Democratic Party in a more nebulous manner and not being specific on the policies perhaps that Joe Biden and or Kamala Harris put forward. We have to remember, I believe Joe Biden put forward more bipartisan bills or signed more bipartisan bills than any other president, I believe, in America's history. And so when Bernie Sanders says, well, the party's turned its back on the working class people, then wouldn't he have to look at the bills put forward by Joe Biden that he did sign into law as emblematic of the Democrats turning their back on the working class? I don't know. I found it odd that he was a bit tippy-toey around criticizing Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
Comes to economic issues, some Democrats are saying it's not just economic issues, it's cultural issues as well. Here's what Democratic strategist James Carville had to say. Take a look.
What killed the Democrats and what killed Biden was a sense of disorder. And part of the sense of disorder was the unfortunate events of what I would refer to as the woke era.
Has the Democratic Party's focus on identity politics gone too far, Senator?
Let me answer it this way. I think if the Democratic Party must continue to stand up against all forms of bigotry. And Democrats should hold their head high in saying, we led the fight for women's rights and to protect the woman's constitutional right for abortion. We led the fight for civil rights, for gay rights. That is something we should be proud of. But it's not either or, Chris, and this is the problem. You can do both. You could say that I'm for raising the minimum wage to a living wage, guarantee health care for all people, expanding Social Security. And by the way, I also support a woman's right to control her own body, etc. It's not either or, it's going forward in both directions.
You know, I've been speaking to some Democrats who are concerned because now President-elect Trump has beaten 2 women candidates, and their concern is that it will make it more difficult to nominate a woman candidate in the future. Do you share that concern, Senator?
No, I don't. I think it's not a question. Look, I'm not going to deny that there is sexism in this country, that there's racism, there's homophobia. It's there. But on the other hand, I think what the American people want to support, whether it's a woman, a man, a black or a white or Latino, whatever, is they want to support somebody who is standing up, Kristen, and fighting for them. People are in pain. People are hurting. They can't afford to go to a doctor. They can't afford to send their kids to childcare or to college.
And this is where I think Bernie Sanders gets it a bit wrong. You see, again, a classic kind of a bait and switch or a political move is to paint things as a moral hierarchy, to say, well, we can have people fighting for underrepresented groups and some of the more progressive policies that the Democrats fight for. But what he leaves out is what I think many Americans saw, which is it's not about the representation of underrepresented groups, which I think most people are generally understanding of. It's that there's an agenda associated with that people are starting to see, that people are interpreting diversity, equity, and inclusion as looking at it through a very singular lens: black, white, race, ethnicity, gender orientation, and people have questions about that. Here in Canada, there were protests of LGBTQ in classrooms because even moderate parents were not necessarily in favor of their children learning about gender fluidity, sexual orientation, and gender identity at a very young age of, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. And so that's where I think many Democrats and those on the left get that prescription wrong. They think that those that support Trump and those that are conservative are racist, misogynist, sexist, xenophobic, etc. But really what we see is that there is some form of DEI agenda that prioritizes very specific individual markers of an individual, race, ethnicity, and gender orientation. And there's a concerted effort to only look at those features or those characteristics of an individual. I would actually argue perhaps that people from the LGBTQ community probably don't want people to always mention their gender identity and sexual orientation. I'm sure they just want to go about their lives and live their lives, but there is discrimination that many within the group face, and that should be called out, which I think most moderates would denounce overall. But again, I don't think Bernie Sanders, to James Carville's point, points to the woke agenda. There's a very clear agenda with diversity, equity, and inclusion that Bernie Sanders doesn't talk about. And I think that's actually a disservice, because I think after this election, Democrats, left-leaning politicians, left of center politicians need to reckon with some of the policy ideas that they've put forward to the general public multiple times, and people are rejecting it. And so I think it's time for most all people to come together and reckon on the policy ideas that work and those that should be done away with, at least for now, until we can revisit it in a more moderate stance. But anyways, those are some interesting insights from Bernie Sanders, very critical of the Democrats after losing, although interestingly enough, still hyping up Biden and Kamala. What do you think of Bernie Sanders' criticisms? Do you think they're warranted? Do you think they're real? Do you think he has a point? Have the Democrats turned their back on working class people? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, folks, definitely subscribe, like, share, and comment. Thanks again, everyone. I'll catch you in the next one.